The pro-Hamas protests have been going on in the UK for pretty much since October 7th. What we've seen, and we've seen many arrests, but something unique that we've seen now is people are being arrested not just for disturbing the protest or doing something illegal during those protests, but specifically what we could say is for their speech. Basically, people have started getting arrested for openly supporting Hamas or glorifying, for example, October 7th, which, at least according to the laws in the UK, violates the Terrorist Act, which specifically targets either people who support a designated terrorist organizations, which Hamas is, or as I said, glorify these terrorist acts. So the first story we'll be covering is a story of Sarah Wilkinson. She's been arrested by the counter-terrorism police for her online postings supporting Hamas. For example, she has called October 7 an incredible infiltration done by the Hamas Air Force. There's also been some posts about her basically doubting the extent of the Nazi Holocaust. I know this is a case for a lot of countries in the EU, basically also having or sort of denying Holocaust is also basically sort of like a violation of hate speech. I think it is also in Slovakia, where I'm from, as well as basically using swastikas for non-educational purposes. But I'm not sure if that is also in the UK, but she also has been denying them. But I think basically the main sort of charge against her is supporting Hamas and basically glorifying October 7. We have one more story which we'll cover later, and we also have a couple broader points. But let me go to Jonathan first. What do you think about this story about Sarah Wilkinson?
Well, Daniel, it's so interesting, and there's so many different facets to it, especially from an American perspective, which personally, at least, when I hear the term hate, hate speech, I kind of recoil a little bit. I mean, that's a real foreign concept to, I think, to most Americans. But protest is used, and I think it's almost like what Rand called a package deal. We say, oh, well, they were protesting. That means so many things to so many different people. I mean, blocking, in my opinion, does it mean speech, as in speaking out? Does it mean threats? Certainly, in my opinion, you're not allowed to outwardly threaten someone, whereas they think that their life is in danger, or their body is in danger, or their property is in danger. Um, Speech is often the kind of the cover for what is just legitimately disruption. I mean, for months now, we've talked about these shitheads who go and block major traffic arteries here in the States, in Europe, all over the place, protesting about big oil or Palestinians or whatever it is. And they would say, well, we're just protesting. We're protesting. But, protest is not included, blocking traffic, disrupting other people. Or is it also just poor taste? And, hearing the highlights of what, and just idiotic, again, poor taste, but like hearing what this commenter Sarah is described. I mean, certainly there's people out there who support complete savages who butcher humans, rape them, hide children amongst weapons amongst children in schools, etc. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who support them. I mean, whether or not posting, boy, I'm glad, Hamas was successful, although that's a joke to begin with, but does that constitute a threat to other people? I don't know. I think this is for legal scholars to determine. But what irks me more than anything is these notion of the people when they go in and they ruin other people's property and they call it protest. Protest is a package deal. I think needs to be really clearly defined. I hope that the UK hasn't gotten to the point of arresting people solely based on speech that they don't like. I mean, one of the stories I think we're going to talk about is about a Holocaust denier. Now, people who deny the Holocaust are, I mean, to say it's evil is like almost letting them off the hook. It's like, it's just beyond ignorance. It's privacy of consciousness more than anything else. But should they be locked up or, put in jail because they're denying the Holocaust? Certainly should be shamed, certainly should be humiliated and avoided and ostracized. So a lot of different issues here. I'm just glad, and Anders, my guess is you'll agree with me that as an American, the freedom of speech is something that's still cherished. And if you remember, Miss Rand was when she was listing what defines a totalitarian dictatorship, or what, freedom of speech is one of the things that defines you not having a dictatorship, as I remember Rand writing. So, thank God, in quotes, for the First Amendment, huh?
Yeah,
It,
absolutely.
just before I give it to Anders, because I really want to point out what Jonathan said. Yeah, I think there is a big problem with, especially when people say the right to protest, because as we've seen, for example, with the protests at Columbia University, where they have forcibly taken over the buildings, where they have been, just completely taking over property. That's not protest. And similarly, in the UK, we've seen protests, blocking roads, standing in front of your car. And
we've covered that item. But if somebody types, gee, I think Hitler was great, I mean, I don't know. It's that question, I think, is it a threat? You cannot make threats to other people, in my opinion, but these are some interesting cases, Anders.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, to the extent that these quote unquote protests, and I agree it's a package deal, to the extent that they violate individual rights, including property rights, and threats, I mean, I think there are legal definitions for what constitutes a threat and not. When it's truly provable that it violates somebody's rights. But when it comes to this woman, if we talk about the first article, her name was Sarah something. I didn't see anything in the article that she had done that. Maybe she has participated in protests that, violated property rights. And by the way, when we talk about property rights, the fact that we have so much public property is creating an issue.
Yes.
If we're talking about a free society, we wouldn't have any public property pretty much, and it would be up to the property owner to decide whether they wanted to host a protest or not on it. And if someone protested on their property without permission, well, then it's a violation, and law enforcement should remove them and take the necessary measures. But back to the article, and I mean, she has been posting online and a lot of despicable commentary, obviously. But as much as we despise what she's been saying and her fellow Hamas supporters or whatever, they have a right to say it. And I wouldn't even go as far as to say that in a way they're doing us a service by saying it, because they're forcing us to sharpen our arguments and everybody out there. And basically it becomes a battle in the marketplace of ideas, in the marketplace of public opinion. And if freedom is allowed to remain, eventually good ideas win out over bad ideas.
Can I jump in for a minute? I wonder, I wish James Valiant, maybe he's in the comments, he would know the answer to this, but I wonder if there's some similarities into, like, for example, being a member of, I read Ayn Rand, the Song of Russia book, and being a member of the Communist Party during the war or during the Cold War versus just speaking out in favor of communism in the abstract. It's like, being a member of the Communist Party, I believe, would make you a threat. You are part of, a criminal or organization that perhaps you're at war with, in a state of war, as against just speaking out in terms of being positive about communist ideas.
Right. Yeah. So I think you have to, and I'm thinking out loud, you have to differentiate between a state of war versus peacetime. Because every country in the world has a communist party or an extreme right-wing party.
Or I think, for example, America had the Nazi Party basically before the Second World War, which I believe was basically targeted once the war started.
Yeah, I don't know that history.
And that's the thing. Maybe I'm contradicting myself now, but if someone's posting, I don't want to say it out loud because I don't want to get clipped, but like, gee, I hope that, I hope Hamas is successful in killing more Jews. How can anyone not think that perhaps is that's a threat? Let alone a Jewish person who might be near that individual. So it's a really fine line here. But speech has to be protected, and not speech, in my opinion, in terms of saying whatever you want on a private social network. Anders, you're exactly right. So much of this speech takes place in the so-called public square, publicly owned property. I mean, I love the fact that on whether it's any of these platforms, Facebook, Rumble, whatnot, the owners of those platforms set the terms. And they might not want Holocaust denial at all on that platform. That's going to be strict. So that's up to the owners and managers of the platforms. But really interesting cases. And obviously in the UK, it's just this notion of freedom of speech is just not, Daniel, it's just not as ingrained. There's no sense of, I should be allowed to say what I want.
Yeah,
offending people, or it's like it's a big part of the deal.
Yeah. As I say, the sort of like American, First Amendment, you won't find that anywhere in Europe. As I've said, even the sort of like the most pro-free speech countries in Europe do have that specific rules against the basically, propagation of Nazism because of the history. And you see the difference in America. And I don't think it's just the First Amendment. I think there is also, as you said, this sort of like American, I should just be able to say whatever I want. I think you just have this in the culture still. And in a sense, it's almost like too much, because now you have people saying, well, I should be able to say whatever I want on someone else's platform, on someone else's property, when it comes to, conservatives, or at least before Elon Musk took over, when you had conservatives basically arguing they shouldn't be banned on Twitter, or they shouldn't be banned on YouTube, because they should be able to say whatever they want. And so just talking a bit more about the hate speech, that is also a very problematic term, because I think there is, in a sense, a speech that could be, in a sense, you could be prosecuted for, inciting violence, or if you spread lies about someone, maybe that could also be. But again, coming out with this separate term, hate speech,
or make threats. I mean, or make threats. That's not
make threats, or Jeff says verbal abuse. I think also if you just go to next to someone and start yelling in his ear, just like random things, that is also in a sense you are violating his rights. But yeah, coming out with this new term, I think Ayn Rand had a term for it. I guess it could be considered an anti-concept. Basically, you're trying to come up with this new term, hate speech. We like speech, and we want to protect it, but there's this different like hate speech, and that's the problem. And I think that has been the biggest problem when it comes to either Canada or a lot of European countries, that this new term has been used basically. And you have to remember, it will always start with the worst people. When it comes to these laws, it will always start with people who are either pro-Nazi, in this case, who are pro-Hamas. Ayn Rand wrote about, protecting protecting like hardcore porn, because basically, yeah, they always, when it comes to violation of rights, they'll always start with the people, in a sense, it's the hardest to defend. So that's why I think this case is really interesting, because you have these two issues. On one sense, you definitely don't want to, you want to preserve free speech. If someone wants to, say Hamas is great, they should be allowed to say that. But yeah, there is a problem. On the other side could be something like, while you are at war, during the Second World War, if someone is openly supporting of Nazism, there might be some problems with it, or some national security threats.
But it seems like so often in the States we hear about people getting I don't want to say incarcerated, but like calling a transgender person by the so-called wrong pronoun, is that construed as hate speech? Could you be really found, I don't know, criminally or civilly liable for something like that? And, I always appreciate Rand's differentiation between, words and force. And, words are not force. But as soon as, Daniel, to your point, you start establishing this totally a non-objective concept is hate speech. What is hate speech? I mean, and first of all, what's wrong with hate? Some people deserve hate. They deserve a whole hell of a lot of it. Please.
Yeah, I wouldn't even go as far as saying, I mean, there shouldn't be hate speech laws. I mean, here in the US, I think the court system is still working pretty well. So, if you think your rights have been violated in these borderline cases that we're talking about here, you feel personally threatened and so on and so forth. I mean, those things tend to make their way through the court system, and we kind of keep tweaking the application of the First Amendment as we go along. And I think that right now, actually, I think the First Amendment your right to speech in the US has never been as well protected as it is currently, actually, because we have a lot of organizations here that are using the court system to challenge different violations. So in that sense, we're in a good place here. But what I did here, I looked at this list of foreign terrorist organizations that the UK has, and the corresponding list that we have here in the US, because we do have a list in the US as well. And it's really interesting to look at the legal ramifications and what you call in Britain proscription offenses, apparently. It was a word I had to look up. But anyhow, so that list, and you can go online and look at this. In the US, it clearly says that the legal ramifications is it's unlawful for a person in the United States or subject to jurisdiction of the United States to knowingly provide material support or resources. So we're talking about action here in that sense, that you're supporting them materially, and that includes financial support and so on and so forth. Now you can, in a separate discussion, we can discuss if a country even should have a list of foreign terrorist organizations. That's another interesting discussion. But that's where the US draws the line, while in the UK list, there is a lot more offenses, and it's a scary read, actually. Invite support for a prescribed organization, express an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organization, arrange, manage, or assist in arranging or managing a meeting in the knowledge that the meeting is to support or further the activities of a prescribed organization. We're getting into a lot of violations of free speech as the UK law is written, or regulation. I don't know if it qualifies as a law or regulation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and maybe we can start with the second story, because I have a few things I'd like to say on that. So the second story is about he calls himself journalist, but I'm not so sure. But it's about a pro-Iranian commentator who has voiced support for Hamas, basically after October 7th, and he has been detained at London's Heathrow Airport for 24 hours and also interrogated because of the under Section 12 of the Terrorist Act. He also has been contributing to Hezbollah-affiliated Al Mayadeen, as well as Iran's Press TV and also Russia's state-controlled Russia TV, as well as he has been basically when the new president in Iran has been picked, he was basically there. They probably don't allow just your normal journalist, just your normal Western journalist to come in. He also has celebrated the drone attack on Tel Aviv. And so something that's interesting in this case, so I also looked up the list of the designated terrorist organization. So apparently the Houthis, and neither the Houthis or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is a designated terrorist organization according to UK, which is interesting because according to US, it is. So, but so I would have made a point that basically they couldn't even basically prosecute him for this if they don't even designate these groups as terrorist organization. But he did also made explicit support for Hamas. So I think that's basically the charge.
Since October 7th, how many journalists have we talked about here on the reality show on the Ayn Rand Center UK who had their little camcorder or whatever, but they're really working with Hamas. They're meeting with Hamas. They're basically they're running their PR firm, if you will. So, I mean, Anders, to your point about providing material support, I really wonder. I mean, look, if you are in deep with Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, traveling through the UK, traveling through the US, I hope that they detain you. I hope that they question you. I hope that they make sure you're not up to any serious issues, because that's the role of government, is to keep us safe. So people who are close and associate themselves, I think, with this is an objectivism, obviously this is my perspective, but people who are close and friendly with Putin or Ahmadinejad or any of these terrible people should be under scrutiny, should be watched very closely. They're more than likely, I think, probably part of the problem.
Anders?
Yeah, I agree with that. In the world we live in, where we're not, unfortunately, very good at protecting our rights, or our government is not, there is obviously a threat from these individuals as they come into the US, and especially those that are planning and carrying out terrorist attacks. And this goes back to the question I asked before about a list of foreign terrorist organizations. I think it's in some way it's a failure. It's the failure of our foreign policy and our military strategy that we're even talking about the threat of terrorist organizations, right? Because if the country did it right, this wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, there should always be at most one designated terrorist organization, and then go to zero pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that in and of itself, we're creating these borderline cases as a result of the bad policies that we have been carrying out for decades, here in the US. And I mean, the same applies for Europe. And this, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, and there is also, Anders, you mentioned that basically US has, in a sense, what we would call probably much more objective way of dealing with the designated terrorist organization, basically when you directly provide material support. But even then, so I didn't go through the list of the US designated terrorist organization. But again, let's say there is a terrorist organization, somewhere in Asia, somewhere in Middle Africa, that is not directly basically threatening American citizens. Yeah, I'm also wondering what is really the point of designated it as a terrorist organization? Again, if it's not directly threatening the US, and if it is, again, United States, if there is a terrorist group hiding in another nation, threatening an actual, proving an actual threat to the US citizens, it should be an obligation of the US to do something about it, not just, we put it on a list and we look out for it. Something should be done.
But they're going to crack down on people speaking and not the actual perpetrators of the evil. I think that's the irony. We're talking about Britain cracking down on pro-Palestinian activists, but no one's cracking down on men who, rape women, men who invade other countries, men who, hurl bombs and missiles into Israel day in, day out.
I mean, just
down on that. It's just people tweet.
Yeah, just quickly to jump on that, it has been said that basically it looks like Keir Starmer's government is becoming a bit harsher on these protesters than basically the last conservative government was. At least that's what I've seen. But again, also Labour's government is much more pro-Hamas. You have people in the Labour government basically arguing for a ceasefire. Again, you have this, Hamas is a terrorist organization. You cannot openly support it. You cannot glorify terrorism, but we will support ceasefire. We will allow Hamas to basically continue existing. Again, it's this sort of in a sense, double standard that, I don't want to give it to the UK. I might think that basically it should be, it might be a national security threat. But again, so is supporting ceasefires.
Well, and I'll also just say this is a sort of UK in speech. I mean, the UK has got to get rid of the BBC. I mean, I don't know how they can go on like this with the BBC still hanging around their neck. I mean, it's like it's not even an albatross, but like I can imagine, and I know Razi is, and many of our UK-based viewers are. It's like, how can you not be pissed when you're seeing this material week after week after week, knowing that you're paying for it, even if it's 50 cents a day or 2 pence a month or whatever it is. I mean, knowing that you're paying for speech that you disagree with, that you don't support, that you think is evil, that you think is wrong. And that's a real, I think, a great feather in the US's cap. I mean, the notion of an American funded and programmed cable news channel, programmed and funded by the government, I think is a long stretch. But, I look at the UK, and the BBC is even more bizarre and antiquated as the notion of national health service, national health care. And, what a great achievement would be if they could shut that or privatize that for good.
Don't you guys have PBS?
Well, I was going to say that maybe we should set an example by getting rid of NPR and PBS first.
Well, that's a good point as well. They don't get as much funding from the government as they used to, but it's still far too much. It's a good point.
Yeah. 10 cents would be too much.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and maybe talking about the BBC, we've covered a story that basically the BBC has covered, where there was this story about supposedly an IDF dog has killed what's the word for it? Basically an autistic child in I'm not sure if in Gaza or in the West Bank territories. But basically they have covered this story, and when you read through the story, you realize the whole thing was just basically from an interview with the mother. Like the whole thing was done just from an interview, and at the end they said the IDF didn't yet comment on this story, and they just published this. And again, it's this sort of like, you just take what one person says and you publish it as like, this is the new story. And then they, in a sense, they retracted a bunch of it. IDF has commented, more information came to light. But again, it was already too late. Once you release the story, once the story is out there, people will just go with the story. We see, months after it, even when it comes to, for example, the Al-Shifa bombing, the first story that comes up, that's gonna be talked about forever, and no one will actually remember the retractions.
I remember, I think Dr. Brooke saying it, or maybe it could have been Dr. Peikoff, or maybe Miss Rand, but something to the notion that like government should not be involved in the realm of ideas. Government, and again, this is my memory or interpretation, not objectivism, but it's not in the idea business of approving certain ideas, disapproving certain ideas, promoting certain ideas, not promoting other ideas. And that to me has always been kind of pretty central, heart of my understanding of the proper role of government. I think Jefferson said that government is a gun, and a gun and a gun and ideas are just the opposite. So the more I think you can keep government out of the realm of judging what ideas are tolerable, what ideas aren't. And that's why, as we started, are you allowed to have an opinion about Hamas? Certainly. Are you allowed to be threatening or make threats? No. I think that's probably one of the main distinctions and what makes the Sarah case so interesting.
We have a super chat from Bulmus. Thank you so much for 30 shekels. Says, until now, the Labour government tyrannically cracked down on any criticism of pro-Hamas, anti-Israel opinions. Now they are adding the same policy to the other side. Something stinks about this. So, I mean, the fact that this is starting happening, in a sense, it is problematic a little bit, but also these laws are already on books. That's why I think I'm always wondering what is the better outcome, basically, because as I said, these laws are on books. The Terrorist Act is on books. If you openly support the terrorist group, if you celebrate terrorist acts, basically the government can come after you, or basically you can be prosecuted because of it. So this is not something, some new law or something. That it's just government is much more in a sense, vigilant about enforcing it. So I think that's basically what is going on here.
Well, certainly, I remember during the period where former President Trump was banned from YouTube or thrown off of social media or whatnot for a period of time. I remember agreeing with Dr. Brooke, who made the comment, isn't it great to live in a country where you can insult the president, you can insult the government, you can speak out against the government, you can speak. And it's why, again, I mean, Ms. Rand wrote about the freedom of speech being so important, and not just saying that, but really understanding it. And I think, Anders, you're right. I mean, freedom of speech is protected in the US, but don't you think most people are just ignorant as to really what that is? I mean, I hear even elected officials saying, Facebook banning this person is violating their free speech. They have a right to speak. So even in here in the States, it seems like there's a real ignorance as to what freedom of speech actually is, which is why you have convoys of Greens blocking traffic on Sheridan Road.
Yeah, I think there is definitely an ignorance, but I don't know if that ignorance is worse in the area of free speech than it is in any other area of how to run a society. I think the majority of people are their interests lie elsewhere. Let's put it that way. But where was I going with that? I lost my thread of thought. I think I think what we're seeing too is it's a good example of how statism begets statism. So when we have a problem, so we have a failed foreign policy, how do we fix that? Well, we add a list of foreign terrorist organizations. Okay, and then these terrorist organizations keep popping up and we don't do anything about it or don't do enough about them. Well, then we have to mute the people who are supporting these organizations. So more statist interventions and in this case, free speech interventions. And obviously that is slowly taking you, it's a slippery slope, right? And it's only with the fundamental right ideas that objectivism provide that we can battle it. But ignorance or not, I think my impression is that we have a much more healthy and lively discussion in the US than what is in place in most countries in Europe. And Daniel, you can probably comment on that better than I can. But I think, I'm encouraged by the free speech movement in the US, and I don't know if there is an equivalent movement that are taking the government to court and organizations to court when they see that free speech is threatened, and for that matter, other individual rights as well.
So to comment on that, there are, at least from what I've noticed, there are free speech movements in a sense all over Europe. At least, I mean, I'm just going to talk to Slovakia and the UK because that's what I know about. But the biggest problem is whenever there is a movement, and maybe even movement that seems to go towards something positive as free speech, because the idea of individual rights is so lost in many people, and because just the idea of basically being pro individual rights first, and then from that move on to other rights, or basically to move on to derivative rights such as free speech. Many people just have this sort of floating abstraction. As I've said, free speech is for many people just a frozen concept, basically just meaning I should be able to say what I want. And what it oftentimes leads to is these people being very much anti big business or anti-social media, basically saying I should be able to say whatever I want on someone else's platform, on someone else's property, which I think is basically the biggest problem. That you might have in a sense free speech movements, but because of the misunderstanding of individual rights, it's very misguided.
And I'll just say, two of the foundational objectivist essays, I think, are The Nature of Government and Man's Rights. These are, if you read, I think, again, nothing else from Miss Rand, start there. And free speech is talked about in Man's Rights. It's listed in the virtue of selfishness, and it's also free online. So, it always irks me. So many people are so opinionated about Ayn Rand. They haven't read anything by Ayn Rand. So take this opportunity to read Man's Rights, The Nature of Government, and learn a little bit on your journey, as all of us are, as students of, this amazing philosophy.
Yeah, so maybe just wrapping up these two stories, I think especially in this climate, it's always very troubling when basically government comes after people for basically just speaking their mind, or in a sense, in this case, it might be even supporting Hamas. If we lived in a more objectivist society, if we had objectivist legal scholars, this would be a great thing for them to discuss, because it is, there is a case for basically national security. And when you have people, maybe even, let's say Hamas had some sort of international groupings basically for recruiting, and you had people being members of that group across the nations, even there might be a case for some sort of regulation. But, that's the biggest problem right now, that, allying yourself with anyone who basically wants to come after people for saying something, even if your specific actions or your motivations might be, from the individual rights respecting way. A lot of these people, it's not, even if we might agree on the policy, it's not like Keir Starmer, specifically in the UK, is some sort of freedom-loving, individual rights respecting man. That's not his starting point. His starting point is probably just whatever pragmatism he woke up with today. So that's always a problem. But Jonathan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, encourage everyone to take this opportunity this weekend to move away from some of the horrors in the world. There's a lot of them, and check out my new book, written by Dr. Leonard Peikoff, who was Ayn Rand's intellectual heir. Can You Really Love a Dog? It gets into the philosophy of pet ownership, how to love our pets even more when they're living, and how to grieve them properly when they leave us. So Can You Really Love a Dog? It's on Amazon.
And the link to that is going to be in the description. Anders, any final thoughts? And also, where can people find you?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Substack, andersingemarson.substack.com. And the third edition of Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right paperback will be out tomorrow. The Kindle version is already out there. This is a proof copy, so it's not for resale, but you can get it at any Amazon outlet near you starting tomorrow.
And link to that is also going to be in the description. You can find me on Damn to Dan YouTube channel. I'm actually planning finally to release something which would be really good. It's going to be a short video and should be really interesting. So I hope I'll be able to finish it up quickly. You can join us tomorrow on the Daily Objective. We will be talking about Candace again. Basically, she's saying the Jews are coming after her again. So we will be talking.
She's not just loathsome; she's tiresome now. But I'm glad you're going to be getting into her because she's still influential worldwide.
Yeah, maybe we should apply some UK hate speech laws to her.
Well, she is in America, and I think everything she says should be protected, as despicable as it is. Although, I mean, the big problem right now is, or at least something that's happening, is she's being kicked off of the platform. So I would definitely support that. I think she is despicable enough to basically, as Jonathan is nicely playing, she should definitely be kicked off. But you can join us tomorrow on the Daily Objective to hear more about that. Thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.